The third and final presentation of the session will be from Dr. Sarah Ifft Decker, who is Assistant Professor of History at Rhodes College. She is a historian of the medieval Western Mediterranean with a particular focus on intersections between gender and religious difference. She's the author of Jewish Women in the Medieval World, 500 to 1500, a survey and source book, and of a new scholarly monograph out with Penn State Press last year, The Fruit of Her Hands, Jewish and Christian Women's Work in Medieval Catalan Cities. Currently, Dr. Ifft Decker is beginning work on two new book projects. One explores how Jews in the late medieval Western Mediterranean participated in a multilingual contractual culture as they shaped family strategies around inheritance, marriage, and divorce. And the other considers links between gender and anti-Judaism in medieval Western Europe. Dr. Ifft Decker also hosts Media Evil, a medieval pop culture podcast. I hope I pronounced that sort of okay. For a popular audience, which addresses popular perceptions of the Middle Ages in films and other media. And the title of her talk today will be Contracts as Weapons, Notarial Power and Jewish Agency in the Late Medieval Crown of Aragon. Sarah, the floor is yours.
See all the fun setup. Come on. There we go. So good morning, and first of all, thank you to Tom and Zoinka and T and everyone else involved in organizing this conference. And also thank you to everyone for being here, and especially to my co-panelists for what has been a really fruitful and intriguing conference so far. The year was 1485, and that spring in the city of Palermo, a marriage was coming to an end. When Favena, daughter of Rashibi Dinar, first married Aron Rabibi, they would have seemed an ordinary Jewish couple within Aragonese-ruled Sicily. All that changed, however, when Aron converted to Christianity, taking the new name Pietro. In the wake of his conversion, the couple had decided to separate. Favena then went to a Christian notary to draw up the Latin contract that you see here. However, this contract alone could not bring their marriage to an end. Even if one spouse had converted to Christianity, Jewish law still required that the husband provide his wife with a bill of divorce, called the get. Only once she was in possession of such a document would a Jewish wife be considered legally divorced and able to remarry. This contract did not replace the get, but rather recorded Pietro's agreement via his brother Shua to divorce his Jewish wife according to the law of Moses. Pietro had moved to the town of Colisano, about 70 kilometers away, which meant that he was now reliant on his brother Shua, who promises here to obtain the get from his brother and deliver it to Favena within the next month. Pietro presumably also would have had to receive permission from an ecclesiastical court to invalidate his marriage and permit him to marry a Christian bride, assuming that's something he was interested in doing. So given that this contract did not successfully accomplish the dissolution of Pietro and Favena's marriage from either a Christian or a Jewish perspective, what was its purpose? Favena found herself in a vulnerable position. Jewish women seeking a divorce were always dependent upon the will of their husbands, and distance made it even harder for women and their families to effectively seek redress from Jewish communal institutions. Aron/Pietro's conversion to Christianity further complicated matters. Jewish courts no longer held any legal authority over him. I argue that Favena sought out this notarial contract as a means of wielding Christian legal authority against her newly Christian husband. Favena, moreover, was not unique. I have thus far found 548 contracts from the Crown of Aragon, plus some additional ones from Provence, in which Jews went to Christian notaries to craft Latin contracts related to inheritance, marriage, and divorce, all areas that were theoretically under the jurisdiction of Jewish communal institutions. Local rabbis, even while decrying Jews' pursuit of justice in Christian courts, treated such contracts as unequivocally valid. Rabbis and ordinary Jews alike apparently identify the strategic utility of notarial contracts. They could provide a powerful weapon in legal battles against both Christians and other Jews. These 548 contracts represent a wide geographical and chronological scope within the boundaries of the Crown of Aragon. They come from Catalonia, various cities, from Valencia, and from Sicily, from the 13th through the 15th centuries. Together, they highlight the complex power dynamics at work when Jews engaged with notarial culture. Inspired by the paradigm of the global Middle Ages, this paper seeks to decenter the perspectives of Christian notaries and instead to explore the agency of their Jewish clients. Jews were often mandated to turn to the notaries to record business with Christians, especially when working in credit. But contracts like these instead represent deliberate choices made by Jewish men and women. They were in no way required to do this. Sometimes these contracts reinforced pre-existing power inequalities. Elite Jewish men could use their familiarity with notarial culture against their less privileged co-religionists. In other cases, however, more marginal members of the Jewish community, and Jewish women in particular, could shore up their positions with recourse to Christian legal culture. These contracts also allowed Jews to offset their vulnerability as Jews in disputes with Christians and converts, even while at the same time the contracts demonstrate Jews' tacit acknowledgement of their disempowerment relative to Christian legal culture. I want to begin by saying a few words about the notaries and their relationship to power and authority in the medieval Crown of Aragon, particularly to Christian power, before moving on to a discussion of some of these specific contracts. So notaries are legal professionals, experts trained to draw up valid contracts in accordance with Roman law and local customary law. They're also public officials appointed by kings, bishops, or local municipalities whose public authority transform private contracts into public and enforceable facts. Notaries, therefore, both possessed legal power through their office and also as individuals tended to belong to local municipal elites. They also have, of course, irrevocably shaped how we study social history in the medieval Western Mediterranean. Ordinary people's growing dependence on the notaries generated a massive volume of documentation, which has allowed medievalists to study a corpus of data that is even unmatched in many modern contexts. Studies of pre-modern notarial culture have often focused on the social and economic benefits that the notaries brought to people, including often people much like themselves, the men and women who belonged to a Christian kind of urban elite. These studies have then often centered the notaries themselves or focused on their clients, but while treating the notaries as neutral recording agents. However, historians working within and beyond Europe have also begun to explore the power dynamics inherent in notarial culture, especially in contexts where notaries interacted with women and with subordinated ethnic and religious groups. And my main point in mentioning this here is to note that we cannot assume the neutrality of the notaries who recorded the wishes of their Jewish clients. And on the one hand, Jews are in many ways integrated into their surrounding communities. Jewish quarters lay in the centers of cities. Christians lived in the Jewish quarters. Jews lived outside the Jewish quarters. And most Jews would have had regular social and economic interactions with Christians. And often such exchanges were very possibly neutral or even cordial. At the same time, however, both minor expressions of anti-Jewish hostility and more dramatic moments of anti-Jewish violence were recorded throughout the later Middle Ages. Undoubtedly, fears of violence and of more regular experiences of anti-Jewish microaggressions inflected Jews' interactions with their Christian neighbors at least some of the time. Even if hostility was never a constant, it was always a possibility. And nor were notaries, by virtue of their position, exempt from the anti-Jewish biases felt by at least some Christians. And here to talk about this image that I noticed a lot of you seem very interested in. So in the Catalan town of Manresa, most or at least many of the documents involving Jews are recorded in these Libri Judaeorum, so registers dedicated specifically to contracts involving Jews. And a couple of the ones from Manresa, this one included. On the cover, if you can see at the kind of very top there, it describes the Jews as the enemies of God. It's the Liber Judaeorum Dei Inimicorum. And also this one as well is marked by this drawing of this kind of fascinating demonic figure. And there's a couple other examples of this. It is entirely possible as well that the text and drawings on this cover are done by the very same notaries who recorded most of the Jewish transactions in the town of Manresa. It is also very possible, we don't know when these drawings were done, but it's certainly, we should consider it a possibility that Jewish clients would have seen these markings when they went to a notary and saw their documents getting recorded. The notaries therefore possessed legal and social power, which was also inextricably linked to their position within the Christian ruling majority, and sometimes with the reality of these anti-Jewish biases, at least from a Jewish perspective. It should also be noted that notarial contracts in contexts where where Jews are being discussed are actually referred to and described as Christian contracts. And so that is included in Christian sources, that they'll say some things like Jews, essentially something along the lines that Jews will not make any claims based on either Hebrew or Christian contracts. And Hebrew responsa refer to notarial contracts with phrases like writs produced by the courts of foreigners. So also emphasizing their externality and their position outside the Jewish community. For Jews, at least, notarial power was a form of Christian power. In some cases, this association of the notaries with Christian power might have created an atmosphere of discomfort for Jewish clients, as this can probably imply, and that's something that I'm not going to focus on as much today, but that is another part of this project. At the same time, however, uneasiness with notarial culture did not preclude Jews from strategically using notarial contracts to serve their own needs. Jews might have found such contracts especially useful as weapons against those with stronger ties to Christian legal authority, in other words, against Christians, including converts. For those Jews who worked in local credit markets, many of their assets came in the form of debts owed to them by Christians. Latin notarial contracts provided a useful way to make their transfer of these assets legible to Christian debtors. When Joseph Abingalel of Valencia died in June of 1362, his executors went to the notary Ramon Bernat and obtained a Catalan translation of Joseph's will. Subsequently, Ramon recorded a plethora of contracts in which Joseph's brother Jacob, who's acting as both the executor of Joseph's will and as the legal guardian of Joseph's minor daughter Sohora, collected on debts owed to his late brother. The inventory that Jacob had drawn up of his brother's estate also included numerous references to debts owed to Joseph by local Christians. So that it's you can see that it's crossed out here, and that means that the kind of issues have been handled essentially. If you can see these sort of little marks, well, it's probably a little difficult, but there it's kind of this is really just a kind of list of items, and among the list of items are debts, or presumably actually physical debt contracts that there would have been copies held in Joseph's home, and these contracts and therefore the debts involved in them are part of his assets. The translated will and notarial inventory together enabled Jacob and his fellow executors to ensure that Joseph's wishes were carried out and that Sohora received the assets owed to her as Joseph's heir. The fact that so much of Joseph's wealth was bound up in debts owed to him by Christians could cause complications and delays under the best of circumstances. These contracts therefore functioned as crucial tools in Jacob's arsenal as he sought to complete these tasks on behalf of his niece. The fact that Joseph's executors moved quickly to both translate the will and only a few days later arrange for an inventory demonstrates that even though Joseph himself might have been satisfied with a Hebrew will, his family and friends were very much aware of the benefits of Latin documentation. Ironically, Christian power enacted through violence may have in turn made Jews more dependent upon the power associated with Christian legal culture. In 1392, Astruga, wife of Astrug Lobel Gracia, went to a notary for a translation of her Jewish marriage contract, or ketubah, into Catalan, with the explanation that it is written in Hebrew and cannot be read or explained in Romance by any presiding jurisdiction, nor by any other person unless that person be sufficiently educated and instructed in Hebrew letters. The context here is crucial. Astruga's ketubah dated back to 1350, so over 40 years before she gets this translation done. The context, of course, are the traumatic massacres that took place in 1391 and the mass conversions in that context as well. These massacres and mass conversions might have left Astruga concerned, more generally speaking, about the stability of her community. If increasingly there were fewer people around her with the language skills to prove the contents of her marriage contract, would she be able to successfully collect the assets owed to her from her late husband's estate? In this particular case, however, when we look at additional documents, it becomes clear that post-1391 family dynamics might have made Astruga especially concerned about her assets. Astruga's daughter, Belair, had converted in 1391 and taken the name Constanza. In November of that year, she appointed a fellow convert as her agent to negotiate with her still Jewish husband, Isaac Raven of Girona, who had at this point relocated to Castelló d'Empúries. The couple had separated, but Isaac had not yet returned her dowry, and moreover appears to have absconded with it to another city. While divorcing Jewish brides often relied heavily on their parents, there is no documentary evidence that Constanza received any assistance from her Jewish family members. Their absence could signal a rift, perhaps related to Constanza's conversion. Astruga might have worried that if widowed, she would find herself facing her now Christian daughter in court as she sought to claim her dowry from an estate that Constanza, as it seems, very possibly would have inherited. I haven't come across any references to any brothers. The family, however, appears to have resolved their conflicts, if any, by 1394, when the now widowed Astruga made Constanza a massive grant of 10,000 sous, representing Constanza's maternal inheritance in honor of Constanza's marriage to, interestingly, an old Christian, as it seems, a man named Pere de Rechac. In 1392, however, it might have seemed reasonable to Astruga to protect herself against Constanza, especially given that she seems to be having some success in embedding herself within Girona's old Christian elite. While some contracts offer striking examples of Jews' strategic efforts to wield the Christian legal system against Christians and converts, Jews also regularly employed notarial contracts to protect themselves against other Jews, including their own kin by blood and marriage. Some families of brides, especially those marrying men from other towns, wrote conditions into Latin marriage contracts that worked to protect their daughters and their family assets from unscrupulous or irresponsible grooms. This series of contracts actually takes us to that mountain town of Puigcerdà that we heard mentioned earlier, and records the marriage between Isaac Ali Cohen of Puigcerdà and Reina, daughter of Salomó Reuven of Castellbó. And these individuals, the bride and groom, are both at this point still in their teens. And Castellbó is a smaller town about 90 kilometers away. The contracts not only recorded the bride's dowry and other financial arrangements, but also included several slightly more unusual stipulations. Salomó undertook to support the young couple financially in his home for the next 2 years. This condition was probably intended to provide Isaac, the groom, with a financial incentive to keep Reina close to home and within the context of her own family and communal networks. Salomó and Isaac also agreed that part of Reina's dowry and part of Isaac's own assets would be kept in a chest in Salomó's home for the next 5 years, to which both Salomó and Isaac would have a key. This arrangement presumably helped to ensure that the young groom would not fritter away their money or invest it irresponsibly. And there are some other examples of this as well, especially in contexts where marriages are between couples from different cities. Salomó also protected his assets in the event that he lost his daughter. If Reina died childless, typically the dowry would continue to belong to her husband, but they make an arrangement that 1/3 of it would then revert to her father. In turn, you can't get something for nothing. Salomó did also agree that if Isaac died childless, that in that case, the dowry is supposed to be returned to the wife, but Salomó agrees that Isaac's heirs could keep, it comes out to about 1/4 of Reina's dowry if Isaac dies first and they don't have children. The choice to place these conditions within a Latin contract might have served as a means of assuring that they were honored. Latin documentation might have allowed Salomó to tacitly remedy other power dynamics within Jewish communities. Isaac's family were leading members of the significantly larger Jewish community of Puigcerdà, and thus might have held more power than Salomó in Jewish communal courts. Latin betrothal contracts from Aragonese Palermo suggest that Jewish women and their families also employed notarial documents to pressure prospective grooms into fulfilling their marital or at least financial obligations. These contracts could also lend legitimacy to betrothals contracted under unusual circumstances. So in 1490, Shibitin Chipu promised that he would divorce his current wife, Desijata, in accordance with Jewish law, and that he would then marry another woman, Hannah, who was represented in the contract here by her brother Abraham Dagba. Shibitin promised that the divorce would be complete by Passover about 3 months later, and the prospective couple made a series of financial agreements. Despite their apparent best efforts, however, this marriage did not work out as planned. Shibitin did divorce his wife, but only 2 years later. And the divorce does not actually that divorce document does not mention this planned marriage at all. It just says that they're getting divorced because they are being expelled from Sicily because it is part of the Crown of Aragon, and they can't agree about where they're going to move to. I have yet to find, unfortunately, a definitive ending to Shibitin's marital adventures. But I do know that he apparently maintained ties with Hannah over these 2 years, both before and after this divorce. He acted as her legal agent, selling off real estate that she would soon have to leave behind. Even if their marriage did not work out, the parties involved might have hoped that a legal contract would lend a veneer of respectability to a rather suspicious situation. The protection might have been especially important to help Hannah avoid any accusations of sexual impropriety, given this apparent involvement with a married man. Before I conclude, I want to make a few comments about the role of gender in these documents. They undoubtedly, I think, demonstrate Jewish agency and their deliberate use of the legal culture of the ruling faith, sometimes even in the context of Christian persecution, even if this agency must be contextualized by the fact that it is still the Christian notaries who held the real power. The question of Jewish women's agency is even more complicated. Astruga appears to have acted independently to protect her assets when she sought the translation of her ketubah. Reina and Hannah, the women in these marriage and betrothal contracts, in contrast, both appear as objects of paternalistic protection and we cannot necessarily identify them clearly as subjects with their own agency. Salomo, in particular, Reina's father, seemed about as concerned with his family's assets as he was with his daughter's well-being, and of course never considered any arrangement that would give Reina control over her own assets. She does not have a key, by the way. The husband and the father have a key. The wife doesn't get a key. Hannah did not even publicly participate in her own betrothal contract, though given that she's an adult and widowed, it's very possible that she played a more prominent role behind the scenes. Jewish women of all social strata, as well as the Jewish poor, regardless of gender, had less experience with and access to notarial culture than in comparison with elite Jewish men. Nevertheless, some documents show that these doubly marginalized Jews also worked to protect themselves using notarial contracts, often against more powerful members of their own community. Jewish wills occasionally offer insight into the dying wishes of some individuals outside this male Jewish elite. The prominence of Jewish women, mostly wealthy, but some of more middling status, is especially striking here. So from the Iberian parts of the Crown of Aragon, out of the 29 Jewish wills I found there, 10 are made by women, and 15 of 22 wills that I found from Aragonese Sicily also record the wishes of dying Jewish women. The presence and apparent agency of Jewish women testators contrasts sharply with their role in other notarial contracts. Jewish women in the Crown of Aragon, with few exceptions, participated in only a small fraction of notarial contracts. And for more on that, read the first monograph. The high numbers of Jewish women's wills could suggest that they were more likely than men to fear that their wishes would not be respected. Astruga, wife of Yusuf Abraham of Huj-Zerda, so we are back to the mountain town of Huj-Zerda, might have chosen to make a Latin will to wield the power of the Christian legal system against her husband, who, according to Jewish law, should actually be her heir. And she left her husband in control of her goods, but required him to support her mother, Fava. She also offered an incentive to keep Yusuf from remarrying. He would only need to pay the legacy that Astruga had left to her mother if he took a new wife. Moreover, while in practice her property would remain under Yusuf's authority during his lifetime, she does not name him as her heir in contrast to Jewish law. She instead names her 2 daughters as her universal heirs. Her Latin will left her mother and daughters with not only financial resources, but also a potential weapon if they found themselves in a legal battle against Yusuf. To briefly conclude, I want to reflect on how this paper, which at first glance seems to focus mostly on microhistory situated within quite specific local contexts, speaks to the paradigm of the global Middle Ages. First, well, of course, as we've discussed, right, microhistories in the aggregate are what make up global history. And my goal with this paper and with the wider project has been to place these localized case studies within the context, at least, of a more expansive Western Mediterranean. And this paper focuses in particular on the political entity of the Crown of Aragon, but has sought to make connections within a wider Aragonese Mediterranean empire by bringing in Aragonese Sicily into conversation with these territories in the Iberian Peninsula. Second, I have also sought to consider how the paradigm of the global Middle Ages can enrich our work even further, can enrich our work even within a specifically European context by decentering Christian perspectives. As several of my colleagues have noted already, the term medieval is often used to imply not only European art, history, and culture, but also Christian art, history, and culture. It is my hope that we can craft richer global histories, not only by connecting Europe and the Mediterranean with other parts of the world, but also by centering the experiences and the agency of Jews and other marginalized groups who lived within the so-called Christian Mediterranean. Thank you.